The recording is 41 seconds long. That is all it is. 41 seconds of audio on a device that was never meant to be found, in a room that was never meant to be entered, discovered by someone who was never meant to be there. 41 seconds that sat untouched for 11 years inside a storage unit in Lisbon, packed into a cardboard box between old training manuals and a broken watch and a stack of letters bundled with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. The person who found it did not know what they had. Not at first. They pressed play out of simple curiosity, the ordinary, aimless curiosity of someone sorting through the belongings of a person who had died and left behind the accumulated debris of a life that had been, in most visible respects, unremarkable. They pressed play. And a voice came out of the small speaker. And the person holding the device stopped moving entirely. Because the voice was unmistakable. Because anyone who had watched football in the last 20 years would have recognized that voice in the first syllable. And because what the voice was saying, quietly, haltingly, in a register so different from any public version of itself that it took a full 10 seconds to be certain it was real, was something that Cristiano Ronaldo had told the world he had never said. Something he had denied, in multiple interviews across multiple years, with the calm and absolute certainty of a man telling the truth. Something that, if the recording was genuine, meant that the most controlled, the most carefully presented, the most psychologically armored athlete of his generation had been carrying a secret in plain sight for over a decade. And that the secret was not about football. It was not about money or rivals or trophies or any of the things that the world usually associated with his name. It was about a person. A specific, particular, irreplaceable person. And what he had never been able to say to them before it was too late. The storage unit was registered under a name that meant nothing to anyone outside a small circle of people connected to Portuguese football administration in the early 2000s. A mid-level official. Someone who had worked in the organizational structures of the sport at a regional level, not famous, not powerful in any way that extended beyond the specific, limited world of administrative football bureaucracy, but present. Connected. The kind of person who accumulates things over a career, documents, communications, objects that have no clear value but that feel, in the moment of their acquisition, like things worth keeping. He had died 14 months before the storage unit was found. Quietly, without drama, in a hospital in Lisbon. He left behind a wife, 2 adult children, a modest apartment, and this storage unit, the existence of which nobody in his immediate family had known about. It had been paid for by direct debit from an account that his wife had not had access to, from a bank that processed the payment automatically for 11 years without anyone noticing, until after his death when the full accounting of his finances was finally assembled and the monthly payment appeared in the records like a small, quiet anomaly that nobody could immediately explain. His daughter was the one who went to the unit. She went expecting to find what people usually find in the storage units of the recently deceased, furniture that didn't fit anywhere, boxes of books nobody wanted, the physical residue of a life. She found some of those things. But she also found the box. And in the box, beneath the training manuals and the brittle rubber band and the broken watch, she found the device. A digital voice recorder of the kind that was common in the early 2010s, small, functional, the type that journalists and researchers used before phones made them redundant. She pressed play. 41 seconds. She played it 3 times before she was certain of what she was hearing. And then she sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit and did not move for a very long time. But to understand why those 41 seconds mattered, why they carried the weight they carried, you have to understand what came before them. You have to go back 11 years, to a conversation that only 2 people in the world knew had taken place. In November 2013, Cristiano Ronaldo was at the absolute zenith of his powers. He was 28 years old. He was in the middle of a season at Real Madrid that would end with him winning the Ballon d'Or by the largest margin in the award's history at that point. He was, by every available metric, the best footballer on the planet, and more than that, he was in the particular state of form where the best version of himself and the everyday version of himself had become indistinguishable. Where excellence had stopped being something he reached for and had simply become what he was. In November 2013, he also received a phone call that he has never publicly acknowledged receiving. The call came from a number he recognized. A Portuguese number. Someone from a specific chapter of his past, not from Madeira, not from the academy years, but from a later chapter. A chapter that had been quietly, carefully closed in the way that certain chapters of a public life get closed when they become inconvenient. When the cost of keeping them open begins to exceed whatever they were offering, the call lasted 22 minutes. Cristiano took it alone, in the back of a car, while his driver navigated Madrid traffic and the city moved past the windows like a film of itself. He did not tell anyone about the call afterward. Not his agent. She pressed play. Not his family. Not the people closest to him in any of the configurations of closeness that his life allowed. He filed it somewhere internal and moved on with the extraordinary, relentless momentum of a life that did not leave much room for dwelling. But the call had opened something. Not visibly. Not in any way that affected his training or his performance or the extraordinary machine-like consistency of his professional output. But internally, in the quiet architecture of who he was when nobody was measuring him, it had opened a door that he had believed was sealed. And behind that door was the thing he had spent years not allowing himself to look at directly. The thing he had never been able to say. What was it? What is the thing that a man who has stood in front of the entire world and spoken his name like a declaration, what is the thing that even he could not say out loud? The recording does not begin with Cristiano's voice. It begins with ambient sound, the particular acoustic texture of an indoor space, a room with hard surfaces and no soft furnishings, the kind of room that sounds like a meeting room or an office or an administrative space of some kind. There are distant sounds that might be a building's ventilation system. There is the faint, almost subliminal sound of traffic from somewhere outside. And then there is breathing, close to the microphone, the breathing of someone who is sitting very near the recording device, someone who may not know it is running. Then a door. The specific sound of a door that is being closed carefully, not slammed, not clicked shut with ordinary unconscious casualness, but pulled deliberately to its frame in the way of someone who wants the room to be private. Then footsteps. Then a chair. Then silence. And then Cristiano's voice. The first word he says is a name. A name that, in the context of everything that follows, carries the weight of everything that was never said in all the years before this moment. He says it quietly, in Portuguese, without preamble, without the warmed-up ease of a man who says things like this easily. He says it like someone who has been holding a word in his mouth for a very long time and has finally, at the cost of something real, let it out. Then he is quiet again. Several seconds. The breathing continues. Then he says, I should have said this when I had time to say it properly. I don't know if I have time now. I don't know how much time there is. A pause. He says, I was afraid. Not of you. Not of what you would say. Of what it would mean if I said it and it turned out to be true. Because if it was true, then everything I did, the way I left, the way I let it become nothing, the way I told myself it was the right decision for both of us, all of it would have been wrong. And I needed it not to be wrong. I needed the story I told myself to be the real one. Because the other story was one I didn't know how to live inside. Another pause. Longer. He says, I'm sorry. That's what I should have said first. I'm sorry. And I miss you. And I think about you in the way that you think about things you put down and couldn't pick back up, and I know that's not enough, and I know it doesn't fix anything, and I know you might not want to hear it. But it's true. It has always been true. And I couldn't let there be no record of it anywhere. Even if the record is just this. Even if nobody ever hears it. Then silence. Then the sound of the chair. Then footsteps. Then the door. 41 seconds, the question that the recording raised, the question that the daughter in the storage unit sat with on that concrete floor, was not who Cristiano was speaking to. It was why the recording existed at all. Why it was here, in this box, in this unit, registered under this name. The official whose storage unit contained the recording had worked, in November 2013, in a capacity that gave him legitimate administrative access to several facilities used by the Portuguese football organization during preparation for international tournaments. He was the kind of person who is invisible in the architecture of any large institution, present at events, present in buildings, present in the rooms adjacent to the rooms where things of significance happen, but never the person of significance himself. What he had been doing in the room where the recording was made, what had brought him to that specific space on that specific day, what had led him to have a device running when Cristiano entered, has never been fully explained. It may never be. The man is dead. His motivations went with him. What can be said is that he kept what he found. He kept it for 11 years, in a storage unit nobody knew existed, paid for from an account nobody had access to. He kept it without ever, as far as can be established, using it for anything. Without ever approaching anyone with it. Without ever converting it into the leverage that it could, in the right hands and the right moment, have represented. He simply kept it. Quietly, at his own private expense, for reasons that died with him. This, in its own way, is as mysterious as the recording itself. Because the world is not short of people who would have known exactly what to do with 41 seconds of audio like that. Who would have understood its value immediately and moved quickly and efficiently to extract whatever that value could produce. And this man, who had possessed it for 11 years, had done none of those things. Perhaps he had his reasons. Perhaps there was a version of integrity operating in him that his position and his obscurity made invisible. Perhaps he simply did not know what to do with something so far outside the ordinary coordinates of his life that he defaulted to the only option that felt manageable, which was to put it somewhere and not think about it. Whatever the reason, the recording had been sitting in that box for 11 years. And now it was in the hands of his daughter, who had not asked for it and did not know what to do with it and was sitting on a concrete floor in a storage unit in Lisbon trying to understand what had just happened to her ordinary Tuesday. And here is where the story takes the turn that nobody could have predicted. Because the daughter made a choice. And the choice she made tells you more about human nature than anything that comes before or after it. She did not upload it. She did not send it to a journalist or a tabloid or any of the various digital ecosystems that consume and distribute exactly this kind of material with a speed and an appetite that has no concern for the people at its center. She did not post it. She did not monetize it. She did not consult a lawyer about what it might be worth or what protections she would need if she decided to release it. She listened to it 3 more times. Sitting on that floor. And then she put the device in her bag and she drove home and she sat at her kitchen table and she thought for a very long time about what the recording was and what it wasn't and what it asked of her and what kind of person she wanted to be about it. She is not a public figure. She did not grow up with any ambitions that pointed in the direction of the kind of situation she was now sitting in the middle of. She is an ordinary person who went to sort out a storage unit after her father's death and found something that had no business being there. That she had no framework for, that the life she had built for herself had given her absolutely no preparation to handle. She thought about her father. About the man who had kept this for 11 years without doing anything with it. About what that silence had cost him, if anything, or whether it had cost him nothing at all, whether it had simply existed in his life as a fact, present and unaddressed, the way certain things are when we don't know what category to put them in. She thought about what he would have told her to do if he had been the one sitting at her kitchen table asking the question. She thought she knew the answer. 3 weeks after finding the recording, she made contact. Not with the press. Not with anyone in the public world that surrounds Cristiano Ronaldo. She reached out, through a chain of connections so indirect and so carefully assembled that it took 11 days to establish, to a single person who she believed could get a message to him without the message passing through any of the layers of management and protection that exist specifically to prevent exactly this kind of contact. The message was simple. It said, "Your father kept something safe for a long time. I think it belongs to you." What happened when Cristiano received that message is the part of this story that everything else has been building toward. Because his reaction was not what anyone would have predicted. Not his team. Not his family. Not anyone who believed they understood him. he did not respond immediately. This is not because he was calculating, not because his team was assembling a strategy or his lawyers were assessing the risk or the machinery of his public life was deciding how to process the incoming information. He did not respond immediately because he needed 11 days to be alone with what the message implied before he could be ready to do anything about it. 11 days. During which he trained. During which he played. During which he gave interviews and signed things and occupied his public space with the usual absolute professionalism. During which nobody who was with him in those days, not teammates, not staff, not family, has reported anything noticeably different about his behavior or his manner or the quality of his presence. He is extraordinary at this. At containing the internal within the external. At maintaining the surface while something beneath it is doing something entirely different. This is not a dishonesty. It is the particular capacity of someone who has spent a lifetime performing at the highest possible level under the highest possible pressure, who has had to learn, out of necessity, to put things somewhere internal and continue functioning until there is space to deal with them. But in those 11 days, in whatever private hours existed at the edges of the public life, he was dealing with something. The message had told him two things. That there was a recording. And that someone who had every opportunity to use it harmfully had instead chosen to ask him what he wanted to do with it. And the recording, which he had not yet heard but whose existence alone was enough to locate him precisely in a moment he had tried to leave behind, was about a person. A specific person. The person whose name appeared in the first second of a 41-second audio file that had been sitting in a storage unit for 11 years, the person to whom he had never been able to say the things the recording contained. The person who, by November 2013, had been ill. Seriously, irreversibly ill. The person who, by the time of the recording, by the time Cristiano had sat in that room with a closed door and said things he did not know how to say to a face, may or may not have had much time left. The person who, in the years since, had died. Without ever knowing that the recording existed. Without ever hearing what it contained. And now it was here. 11 years later. In the hands of a woman who had found it in a box in a storage unit and had done the most human possible thing with it, had thought carefully about what it was, and had decided to give it back. The day Cristiano finally heard the recording, the day he put on headphones and pressed play and listened to his own voice say the things he had said in that room, is the day this story becomes something other than a mystery. It becomes something that has no clean category. Something that sits at the intersection of grief and relief and the particular ache of things that cannot be undone but can, perhaps, be finally acknowledged. He listened to it alone. He has not described this experience publicly. He has not described it to anyone, as far as can be established, in any context where it might be reported. What is known is that he listened to it, and that afterward he was quiet in a way that the person who facilitated the exchange, who was present in an adjacent room, not listening, simply present in case anything was needed, described as the quietest they had ever seen him. Not distressed. Not undone. Quiet in a way that had a specific quality to it. The quality of someone who has heard something they needed to hear, even though it arrived 11 years after the moment when hearing it would have meant something different. Even though the person the recording was addressed to, the person whose name opened those 41 seconds, would never hear it themselves, the recording, it became clear to Cristiano in the moment of hearing it, had not been made for any other purpose than the one he had believed when he made it, to put somewhere a truth that he could not yet speak directly. He had made it in a room he did not realize was being recorded. And the man who had inadvertently captured it had kept it, for 11 years, with a discretion that Cristiano had not arranged and had not known to be grateful for and that had been given anyway, freely, by a man who was now dead and could not be thanked. He thought about that. About the random, improbable grace of it. About the fact that something so private and so vulnerable had been in the possession of someone he had never known, for a decade, and had been protected. Not perfectly, it had survived, it had been found, it was now in the world in a way it had never been meant to be. But protected in the ways that mattered. Kept from the spaces where it would have been used as ammunition. Held with the particular and uncommon decency of someone who understood, without being told, that not everything that can be leveraged should be. He asked to meet the daughter. And this meeting, quiet, private, unreported, occurring in a cafe in Lisbon on an afternoon when Cristiano Ronaldo was supposed to be somewhere else entirely, is the meeting that changed the final shape of this story. She arrived first. She is, by all accounts, an ordinary person, not easily impressed, not nervous in the way that people are sometimes nervous when they are about to sit across from someone very famous, because the situation she had been navigating for the past several weeks had so far exceeded the ordinary coordinates of her life that famous had stopped being the most relevant category. She was sitting with a coffee and waiting, and when he walked in, without security, without staff, in clothes that were designed not to draw attention, she recognized him immediately and felt, she has said, primarily relieved that he had come at all. They talked for 2 hours. The details of what was said belonged to the two people who were there. What she has shared, in the single conversation she has had about the experience with someone she trusted, is this, that he was not what she expected. That the version of him in that cafe, unhurried, direct, without any of the performed confidence that his public persona projects, was a person she found herself responding to as simply a person. That he thanked her. Not in the formal, managed way of someone executing a damage control strategy. He thanked her in the way that people thank each other when they mean it, briefly, directly, with eye contact, in a way that acknowledges the full weight of what is being thanked for without making a performance of it. He told her, she said, something about her father. Something specific and generous, something that suggested he had spent time thinking about who her father must have been, about the choice he had made and what it said about him. He told her that the recording, in the end, had given him something he hadn't known he needed. Not closure, he was careful to say that word, she remembers, to say it was not closure, because closure is a word that implies a neatness that does not belong to things like this. But something. A completeness. The knowledge that the thing he had said in that room, the thing he had never been able to say to a face, in a moment, in the way it should have been said, existed somewhere. Had been witnessed, even accidentally, even imperfectly. Had been kept safe by a stranger and returned by his daughter and was now real in a way it had not quite been real before. She gave him the device. He took it. They said goodbye in the street outside the cafe and went in different directions, and that was the end of the story as far as either of them was in it together. What Cristiano has never said publicly, what the recording contains, what the person it was addressed to never heard, is something that resists being reduced to a summary. Not because it is complicated. Because it is simple. Because it is the kind of simple that only becomes possible after years of refusing it, after all the complicated structures of self-protection have finally, at the cost of something real, come down. He said he was sorry. He said he missed someone. He said he had been afraid of what the truth would mean and had chosen a story instead of the truth and had lived inside that story for long enough that he had almost stopped knowing the difference. And he said one other thing. At the very end of the 41 seconds, in a voice that had dropped to something barely above a whisper, the voice of a man who is saying something for the first time after a very long time of not saying it, and who is saying it to a room, to a device, to nobody, because nobody is the only audience he could trust with it. He said, I loved you. I should have said that first. I loved you and I didn't know how to be someone who said it, and by the time I knew how, there wasn't enough time, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing that I had time and I spent it on the wrong things. I had time and I was afraid. And the only thing I can do with that now is not be afraid anymore. Of this. Of any of it. 11 years in a box. Returned by a stranger's daughter. Heard, finally, by the person it was meant for, even though that person was gone. Even though the words arrived too late to be anything other than what they were, true, and real, and permanent in the way that true things are, regardless of whether the person they were meant for is still there to receive them. Cristiano Ronaldo still plays football. He still trains with the obsessive, meticulous, utterly unyielding commitment that has defined his professional life for over 2 decades. He still scores. He still sets records. He still occupies the space that fame creates around a person who has been at the center of the world's attention for long enough that the attention has become simply the climate he lives in, present, constant, the baseline condition of his existence. But the people who know him, the ones who have known him across enough years to notice the texture of his silences as well as his words, say that something has been different since that afternoon in Lisbon. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would be visible to someone watching from the outside, from the safe and simplified distance of the highlight reel. But different in the way that people are different when they have finally put something down. When the weight they were carrying has been acknowledged and named and, in whatever imperfect and irreversible way was available, addressed. He is still the most controlled public figure in sport. He is still the man who walks into a room and becomes its center of gravity. He is still the person who has spent a lifetime telling the world, through every training session, every record, every extraordinary act of sustained excellence, that he is not done, that the story is not finished, that there is more. But occasionally, in the spaces between the public moments, in the sideline reactions that the cameras catch when he doesn't know they're watching, in the expressions that cross his face between the goal and the celebration, in the moments before the armor reassembles itself, there is something visible that was not always there. Something that might be called peace, except that peace is too soft a word for a man who is constitutionally incapable of softness. Something closer to resolution.